When the Reverend Calvin Yashie Hill discovered the Wesleyan Quadrilateral as a seminary student, the Navajo holy man knew he had found his denominational home. Discover how Wesleyan discipleship aligns with indigenous spirituality and how understanding both can lead to a more welcoming church. Today's Get Your Spirit in Shape episode is part one of a two-part conversation with Reverend Hill as we learn more about the culture and rituals of indigenous people and how we can better live together in the world and the church. Pastor Hill, welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape.
Thank you. Glad to have the opportunity.
Well, I appreciate you being our guest today. We met recently in Bozeman, Montana during the historical convocation. And during that multi-day meeting, there was research presented about the church's involvement with indigenous boarding schools in the past. And I left that meeting really saddened and troubled by the harm that had occurred in God's name. I was troubled at what I did not know about the history. And I really just I felt a need to learn more. And so I want to learn more about the indigenous people, the culture, the rituals, how we can live together inside the church, outside the church. And that's when I issued an invitation for you to be a guest. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And sorry about the way you're feeling. It wasn't the intent. And I hope people realize that as we come forward as natives, that's not the intent. But truth really does do that. So
yes, and it was not presented in a shame-filled way at all. It was just
right.
presented as history and facts.
Mhm.
And what was disturbing, and we're kind of jumping right in, was how little I knew. That was the part, and how much I want to both learn, but also want to learn more about the past, but also learn more about now, and how the indigenous cultures are really, what I witnessed and heard, are fighting to retain the culture and the heritage. And so I want to speak to you about that. Before we get started, though, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your church, where you're pastoring now?
Sure. I'm Reverend Calvin Hill, Calvin Yashie Hill, actually. Yashie means little. My real name is Calvin Little Hill. I am Navajo, full-blooded Navajo. There's no other nationality in my genes except just Navajo. My clan they call Tachini. Tachini is translated "red running between the water people," and I am born for the Tlezetlana. Tlezetlana means the goats, mini goats, is what it means. And when I introduce myself in Navajo, that's usually what I say. I do speak Navajo fluently. I also speak Hopi, and I also speak Zuni, and of course I'm speaking English, so you know that. And went to seminary and learned about Greek and Hebrew. I married an Ojibwe woman from the Three Fires Nation up in Michigan. She's from Detroit. Her name is Sherry Yashie Hill, and we have 7 kids, 17 grandkids. All of our kids are grown and out, and I serve here in Newcastle, Wyoming at First United Methodist, and I'm also the CRM for the District of Wyoming. So that should, maybe that's a good history to start with. I am also a son of a Navajo code talker. Father served in World War II in 1940 and 1946, and he was deployed off of the USS Swanee. So maybe that would help. Oh, also, which is probably really important, Christianity really didn't come to my family. I am probably the first generations of the Christian faith. It didn't come to us until 1972 or 1970, around that era. My father was the second ordained Navajo to the Presbyterian Church. And that's when our family had some very violent disruptions among each other because of the Christian faith. So Christianity is very new to me. So just so that you know that, and I've learned quite a bit very quickly.
Wow, what a rich history. I was going to, after you said you have 17 grandchildren, I was just thinking what a joyful home you must have when you're all
Yeah,
gathered together.
yeah.
So and but what a really interesting and rich history that that covers a lot of history that other people may know, the code talkers and of World War II. And so thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Today, we're recording this on Indigenous Peoples Day, which when we set the date, you mentioned that that was that this would be the day that we would be talking. What's this day like for you and your family?
It's a day to challenge who we are as Native people against all the rest of the white America. To have a white American recognize that Columbus didn't discover anything, that the land itself was occupied before Columbus came. So that's a day that we recognize. We want our voices to be heard. We want to be seen. We want to be recognized instead of us always being pushed aside. Even some of those information forms that you fill out of gender or of race, usually the Native American is not on there. It used to be that it used to say other on those
Like
listings.
the census
Yeah,
forms?
like a census form or any kind of other forms that come even going to school. They would put us as other, or they put us as red man. Even some of our birth certificates were recognized as being other or non-black or non-white, and even Hispanic. We didn't have that. We were just put as other or something else. It's what CNN said about us. We're something else. So Indigenous Day really helps us to be recognized and noticed, and to the challenge to the rest of white America is our movement of being recognized and being added to the historical process of being educated in America.
You know, as we were sharing, or I was sharing before we started the podcast, that as I'm a white person in America, I'm a United Methodist, and I recognize that I have a need to learn more about how to properly welcome my brothers and sisters from the indigenous communities. And so I'm really wanting to explore that today. I know that you have prepared. I read an article that you prepared called The Four C's of Cross Cultural Outreach and Discipleship, and it comes from an indigenous perspective. So I want us to definitely talk about that. And then I want to find out just more about you as a United Methodist. Your father was Presbyterian. How did you, Pastor Hill, find your way to the United Methodist Church?
So my journey in the Christian community was not a pleasant one. I lived in Salina Springs, or Salina, they would call it. Salina Valley, sometimes referred to as Salina Springs in Arizona, which is on the Navajo reservation. It is just maybe 12 or 13 miles northeast of the Hopi Reservation. Most people know Chinle, Arizona, or Canyon de Chelly. It is in that vicinity that I grew up in. I did not know English, and the time that we were all being encouraged or even taken away from the reservation from our parents, the residential schools is what I went through. My brothers and sisters and I, we went with the Mormon Church. We went with the Mennonite Church. We went with the Presbyterian Church, and we also went with the the Christian Reformed Church. They all took us off the reservations and taught us English, taught us about the Christian faith. So I went through all of these different religious sects and also religious denominational faiths. And as I was with the Christian Reformed Church, they brought me up to Michigan. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, I finished up my undergraduate with them and started seminary work at Calvin Seminary. It just didn't fit, and their doctrines, their tulip doctoral perspective of predestinations or the elections, limited elections, and all that. It just didn't fit me. So I just sort of challenged and pushed back, and they started giving me some bad grades because of my challenging of especially the predestination piece or the total deprivation piece. And I recognize that that's not what I was taught as a child in my native faith, in my Navajo faith. So I went to a church, St. Paul's United Methodist Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and heard about the Wesleyan faith. It was actually a project that we had to go and look at other denominations from the Christian Reform eyes and do a report. And there's when I came and understood about the Wesleyan Quadrilateral of traditions, experience, and scripture and reasoning. And that fit more of my understanding of what God really is with God's people, all of God's people, regardless of faith. And that's when I came and joined the United Methodist Church in the early '90s. It took me quite a few years to really come with full agreement with the Christian faith. I still ain't in full agreement with the Christian faith, but this was the Wesleyan heritage and traditions is a faith that I can be more native, more Navajo, because there's more flexibility than the Christian Reformed Church. There's more flexibility than Presbyterian Church. Of course, all the Calvinist views are much different. And there was more flexibility than the Mennonites and also the Mormon faith. So I thought that I would become a Methodist, and I joined this process of the Christian faith specifically out of survival. I myself was initiated to be a holy man long before I understood about the Christian faith, long before boarding school ever had happened in my life. Uh, and as I was initiated, that's where I encountered God. I believe that's where my real calling happened. And I think the Christian faith sort of hindered my understanding of God, but increased my understanding of God's Son. And that's when I started hearing about Christ. And as I heard about Christ, I compared those stories with our stories and our creation stories. And we have the same theology, different philosophies in that theology, but it's the same. And I put them all together, and I started writing and thinking about them and started talking about them. And it was only in the Methodist faith that I was allowed to have that freedom to really express myself. So that's how I became Methodist.
Wow, I just love that story. I hear that so often too when I talk to folks who come to Methodism. It is the Wesleyan Quadrilateral that they feels like it frees people to have, to explore, to have questions without, without judgment and just have that space. And I love that. I want to go back to something you said, Pastor Hill. You said that you were initiated as a holy man before you even went to school. And if I heard you correctly, you were sent to boarding schools.
Yeah,
away from
yeah.
your family. So as a child, was there something seen in you that you were going to become a holy man? Was this a lineage piece? How did that initiation occur?
Yeah, so in our medicine society, as medicine men, there's several different societies. The society, the Turquoise Society that's recognized me, they was my father's side. My father was a medicine man. My grandfather and my grandmother had dabbled with it, but they weren't really it. My father was the one who really stepped up. And as they recognized that, they knew that they had to continue that relationship of medicine people. So they recognize out of all of their grandkids that I would be one of them. And I don't know how they choose this. They recognize the soul, they recognize the compassion, they recognize the child as they are growing up. They see the compassionates, they see the sides, how children just have a natural innateness that displays God's mercy and God's grace. And they also display the practices before they even learn of it, they're already doing it. And maybe that's why Jesus said, let them come unto me, because they have that natural innateness and recognizing God and how to reach God. That is how they chose me. And when you're chosen, it's not just that I'm going to do it for a few years. It's a choice for life. And when you're chosen for life, you represent the whole community. You represent the whole family. You represent the whole nation. And that's when an individual, once they're in that place, I can't escape it. So that's when I was initiated. My grandmother pierced my ears, and I wear the earrings, and they put corn pollen on my tongue and on my head, underneath my feet, and we had this ceremony. As we went through this ceremony, they said that your ears are pierced. You will hear the Spirit of God. You will hear God speak to you, and my earrings are held in with string because they said that God is the creator of peace, and you're here to give the message of peace to all people, not just your family, not just the community that you represent, but all God's people. And so from that moment on, I recognized my position. I was like maybe 6, 7, maybe 5 years, somewhere in that area. So they select really early, and that's when my real ordination happened back then. Not with the Methodist Church, and that's when I recognized in my life that that's when I was a holy man for the people. And I wanted to join the Marine Corps, but my grandmother said that no, that's not who you are. You're not that kind of warrior. You cannot have blood on your hands and try to talk about the peace of God to people. So that when my father was in service, my brother went to Vietnam, and I really wanted to go, and I probably went to Panama and Desert Storm, but then that one probably ended up a different route. So I didn't make it.
Well,
That is one regret that I have in life, is that I wanted to become a Marine, and I couldn't.
God had other plans.
He did. Yes.
Yes, that is such a big call to put on a young child. Did that always, I mean, were you then, as you grew up, were you kind of set aside in that way? Was it always kind of, as even as you were 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, it was like, this is, you are being mentored as a holy man?
Yeah, so when you're selected, yeah, they train you. They teach you all of the songs. They teach you all of with the Navajos. They teach you all the sand paintings. They teach you all the creation stories. They teach you the stories that God has innate into people, and how the sides of the people and the relationship with God happens. They teach you all that. So you learn songs, you learn sign paintings, you learn dances, you learn ceremonial practices. All of that happens, and it's still on today. I mean, there a lot of the real traditional natives, they still do that. The more assimilated are trying to learn and come back and learn that. But there are many of us who are brought up in that way of lifestyle, and we lived it every single day. It was something that wasn't handed to us by book. Many of our relatives now, the ones that are assimilated, the more urban ones, they're learning from books, they're learning from other nations, and there's sort of a mix, philosophy and theology that they're learning that's a little bit different. But those who are in the traditional background, we learn firsthand. We're taught by, and it's all done in our language. It's not done in English. So there's a big difference.
That is huge that you were on that path and raised in that tradition, and then you moved into the United Methodist Church. So how, and I know it wasn't that simple. It was decades of that. But I guess I have a couple of questions. How what did you bring? Like, I can't imagine that you've learned all of this and that it doesn't still impact who you are as a United Methodist pastor. What have you brought into your ministry?
The reality of spirituality is what I brought into my ministry, and the reality of the spiritual forces and movements in our community. And so I don't have this um, analytical process that there's there, and I know that's within the Western's white society of Christianity. There is that the systematic theology that comes from a very educational, artistic way of explaining how faith develops. So I understand that systematic theory or that systematic route, but I also understand that spirit that really works and how the Holy Spirit works in the process in more depth because of the experience that I've had many times. I have seen in my own faith, I have seen healings that have happened, both in the Christian's process or the Christian faith, the Christian procedures, and also within my own Navajo traditions. I've seen medicine men do stuff, and I've seen pastors do stuff, and I have even engaged in quite a bit of that process. I don't think I limit myself in that systematic understanding of faith. I recognize the Holy Spirit engaging at all times, and so I think I bring more of that understanding than I do trying to explain from a analytical, or what would you call it, academic viewpoint. I think one thing that I know, that in the academic understanding of faith, you're limited. There is a limit of knowledge that you can retain and try to explain it. When the Spirit moves, you have to experience, and that's part of our tradition of experiencing. And then that process of reason that we're a part of, I think sometimes limited who we are. And it doesn't help us to look back towards the traditions of our faith, whether it's in the Christian faith or within our own tradition. And from that whole process, the experience gives more knowledge than reasoning would. So
See,
see, you can see that the heritage there, it really comes out.
It does. And it feels, as I'm hearing you talk about it, it seems like you have just a wider vision, is what I'm kind of hearing you. You don't, it's limitless almost.
That's
It,
right. That's right. And if I'll tell you, if the native theology was ever fully accepted or maybe even involved in our faith, then the dwindling that we're seeing within the Christian faith would stop. Because the new generation that's coming, they're looking for this. They're looking for what I know and what I understand. And it's not just some sort of practice that you do that is romanticized. It is actually a faith that is a movement.
That was the Reverend Calvi Yashie Hill discussing Methodism through his perspective as a Navajo holy man. To learn more, go to umc.org/podcast and look for this episode where you will find helpful links and a transcript of our conversation. If you have questions or comments, feel free to email me at a special email address just for Get Your Spirit in Shape listeners, gysis@umcom.org. If you enjoyed today's episode, we invite you to leave a review on the platform where you get your podcast. Thank you for being a Get Your Spirit in Shape listener. I'm Crystal Cavanis, and I look forward to the next time that we're together.